Hey guys, welcome back to our YouTube channel. This is Dave at One Line Coffee, and I have a new video for you today. Should be kind of a fun one, not too long. Really, we're going to talk about two things today. We're going to talk about French press and how to brew one at home, but we're also going to talk a little bit about why that's a really good option for really inexpensive home brewing. So I have a few things in front of me today. The primary press that we're going to be using is from a company called Espro. So this is kind of one of their top-end presses. I really like it. This is an 18-ounce press. We're actually just getting ready to launch a glass version of this, which is going to be a little bit more affordable. This is a 32-ounce press, which is great. The biggest thing about Espro and the reason why we sell them has to do with the filter that's on these. So unlike a traditional French press filter, which has only one layer of filtration, we actually have two layers here. So we have two filters. What that allows the press to do is actually have two different kind of fineness of filter. It has a slightly coarser filter, which is going to get most of the coffee out. Then it has an interior, much finer filter, which is going to help get out most of the fines or the kind of very small particles of coffee. We found that it results in a much cleaner cup, and we also found that a lot of people that don't like French press actually love coffee out of an Espro. So now that we have that out of the way, let's talk about why a French press is actually a really good option for home brewing. One of the biggest things about home brewing that is the most expensive part is both the brewer and the grinder. Your grinder is going to be expensive because there's a minimum amount of money that you can spend in order to get a grind quality that's going to support a wide range of brewers. However, you can usually get by with a less expensive grinder if you're focusing on brew methods that require a very coarse grind. So kind of going back to the extraction theory kind of video that we've done in the past and talking a little bit about how grinding works. Coffee is a very brittle substance, and when we grind that coffee, what we're really doing is we're cutting off pieces of each of those coffee beans. But because coffee is so brittle, every time we cut it, it actually fractures, and that fracturing creates fines, and those fines are essentially little tiny dust-like particles of coffee that has a huge ratio of surface area to mass, and those particles tend to cause over-extraction in the cup. And if you have enough fines in your cup, well, then you'll end up with over-extracted notes. The cool thing about a coarse grind is that we are cutting that coffee significantly fewer times than we're actually cutting a very fine grind. And so because of that, we're actually creating less fracturing and less fines. So a less expensive grinder is going to be able to produce a much higher quality grind at the coarse end of the spectrum than it would at the fine end of the spectrum. And so that brings us to a French press. I love a French press because you don't have to go out and spend a couple $100s on a grinder, or a couple thousand in some cases. You can actually get by with something like this, which is super affordable. We sell these for $35. It's a great little grinder. A lot of people really dislike it because it involves a lot of work in the morning. But again, the cool thing about setting a really coarse grind means that it actually takes less turns of the handle. It's actually going to grind much faster. So good option, good starter kit. In terms of actually brewing French press, I tend to use what's called a cupping method. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm actually going to preheat my kettle. Preheat my press. So just throw a little bit of hot water in there. Try to get the sides nice and warm. Swish it around. Make sure that everything's really, really well heated. Now French press is pretty simple. It's immersion method. Really all we're doing is throwing some coffee in there, adding some water, and waiting. And this method is pretty similar to that. I'm kind of using our standard dosing, which is around a 15-to-1 ratio or so. Using 23 grams of coffee for about 350 grams of water. Of course, if you like your coffee a little bit stronger, feel free to up your dose a little bit weaker, down your dose. But the flavor should still stay the same. So the first thing I'm going to do is throw my coffee in there. And I'm going to dose out some water. So the really cool thing about French press is if you hold your grind consistent and you hold your water volume and your dose consistent, French presses are really, really easy to dial in terms of listening to your palate. So we'll get back to that in a second. I'm going to tear out my scale. I don't feel like activating the timer function on this scale, so I'm just going to start a timer over here. I'm going to add just enough water to saturate the grounds that are actually in there. So probably about 40 grams or so. I'm going to take a spoon, I'm going to stir, just to make sure that everything is really well saturated. I don't want any pockets of dry grounds in there. This is also going to give it a chance to kind of off-gas a little bit and get rid of some of that carbon dioxide. About 30 seconds in, I'm going to go ahead and just add the rest of my water. I'm going to try to move that stream of water around just to make sure everything gets really well saturated and kind of agitated. One other really nice thing about a French press is you don't necessarily need a kettle like this. So you can use any water or any electric kettle, any hot water kettle off the stovetop. The placement of your water doesn't need to be precise. You're really just kind of dumping all the water in there. And so again, that's one less thing that you have to buy in order to brew at home. Now that my water's in there, I'm going to go ahead and put a plate on just to kind of trap my heat. You'll notice that I did not put the press top on quite yet. I'm actually going to wait on that until the very end. And this is kind of where the difference in the actual method comes into play from what you might have traditionally seen. One of the negatives that you have with a press, if you do it kind of in a traditional manner, is when you put the press top on and you actually press it, you're kind of forcing water through this bed of grounds relatively quickly as you press down, and creates some turbulence and has the capacity to create some over extraction. So one of the things that we'll do is when we get to about 3 minutes and 30 seconds into the brew, I'm actually going to remove the plate. I'm actually going to, almost like I was doing a cupping, I'm actually going to skim the coffee off the top into a little dish to get some of that coffee out there, so when I actually go to press, it's going to be easier to press, I'm going to have less resistance, and I'm not going to have kind of that capacity for over extraction that I might have had before. So to talk a little bit about what coffee we're using, today we're actually using a P&G. So this is from a mill in Papua New Guinea called Riverside. Really kind of a cool story. Really a guy had not a lot of access to market for his coffee. And so kind of took it upon himself to create his own wet mill and start actually processing coffee for his neighbors. And in doing that, they were actually able to take their cherry from kind of a product that could easily go bad if it couldn't make it to a mill in time, and get it to a shelf-stable product that they could actually then deliver kind of in quantities every few weeks to an exporter. Really opened up a market for them, and has really done a lot of cool things in terms of making that industry sustainable for that community. It's really, really nice coffee. This is kind of one of the surprise coffees of the year for us. Really, really cool notes, passion fruit, cola, which is like one of my favorite coffee notes ever, blackberry, just super sugary, really great coffee if you haven't had it. Also available on our website. All right, guys, so I am just about at 3:30. When I get there, I'm going to remove this plate, and I'm really just going to take both of my spoons and kind of go in there and just scoop out that kind of floating layer of kind of grounds and foam that we're going to see on top of our slurry. All right, so here we go. Plate can go off to the side. Now this is an 18-ounce press technically, so I'm reaching in here a little deeper than I might otherwise have to. That's okay, not a big deal. You do not have to brew at full capacity, especially in this method, because you don't have to worry about the plunger sinking down into the water, or into the brew slurry, I should say. All right, a little bit more on the side here. And that's done. So I'm right at 4 minutes right now. I'm gonna go ahead and place my top on there. And I'm just gonna provide firm, gentle pressure. One thing you'll notice is with the cupping method that you really don't have to provide that much pressure. By removing a lot of those grounds from the top here, it becomes much, much easier. So I got a cup. I'm gonna go ahead and pull it out. So one interesting thing about French press is actually a little bit weaker than what you would actually get out of a traditional drip method. And the reason being is that in a traditional drip method, as the water flows through, we assume that most of the stuff is extracted. Any water that's actually being held in those grounds is generally going to have a very, very low TDS or strength. Most of the flavor is going to end up in the cup. the French press, we don't have that flow rate. And so what ends up happening is any water that's being absorbed by the grounds in here actually does have the same TDS as the rest of the brew. And so because of that, if you think about it, the extracted coffee material is actually going to be distributed through how much water you use, in this case the 350 grams, versus how much coffee came out, which on a pour over for the same ratio might be anywhere between 290 and 300 grams of water. So it's a French press, contrary to I think what some people think, is actually going to be slightly weaker, but the flavor should still be really, really good. Yeah, it's tasty. So the way that you can actually adjust flavor in a French press is if you want it a little bit, or I should say, there's really two ways. Number one is I would keep your dosing the same just so that you have a constant. And then the two things you can really adjust are going to be your fineness of your grind and your length of extraction. What I would focus on is just dialing in your grind or picking a grind and kind of starting there and not really messing too much with it. And then actually just changing with your extraction time. So if your coffee tastes a little under extracted, if you get some vegetal notes, or if it's overly acidic, or has a little bit of salinity to it or something like that, hallmarks of under extraction, just let it go a little bit longer. So instead of 4 minutes, maybe go out to 5. On the flip side of that, if you have an issue where your coffee is just tasting overly roasty when it really shouldn't, or bitter or astringent, those are hallmarks of over extraction. Just shorten your brew time. Depending upon the quality of your grind and the fineness of your grind, I mean, you could be down at 3:30, 3 minutes. I've had great presses at 3 minutes of extraction, so that's definitely an option. Finally, guys, that's pretty much it on French press. It's pretty easy. The worst part about a French press is cleanup. I'm not going to make you guys watch me do that, but you've all probably done it before and understand that cleanup's a bit of a pain. But in terms of doing really high quality coffee at home on a budget, I think this is a great setup. You're talking about 35 bucks for this guy. You're talking about 35 bucks for this guy. You know, a really cheap digital scale off Amazon. I mean, you're looking at really all in maybe $75, $80 for a full setup of coffee that's going to produce really the level of quality that you can really get at a coffee house. So guys, thanks for visiting with us today. Thanks for listening to me. I hope you guys learned a little bit. Please feel free to visit. Like I said, we have both of these items available on our website, as well as some delicious coffee. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. And if you like this video or have questions, please leave a comment. We will be happy to answer. Thanks guys, y'all take care.